Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. As usual, I feel the urge to say good morning, although I don't know what time it is where you are. It is morning here. I like to record these things early. I don't know. I'm an early morning kind of person. I get a lot of energy in the morning, and I like to get things done sometimes before most of the rest of the world is awake. There's a clarity that happens in the morning. So the world has an aura. We have auras. We have, astral bodies and etheric bodies and all of these things. And, we are, if you are sensitive, and we're all sensitive to some degree or another, we pick up on the quote unquote vibe around us. And so morning times, before everybody is awake, the vibe is cleaner. There's people aren't up and busy, and it tends to feel a little calmer for me. And so this is a good time for me to do these things. Some people are late night people. I think my daughters fall into that category. And it's probably similar where, it's the vibe gets calmer after most people are asleep and, not going about the worries of the day and whatnot. So today, it is, and again, I don't know when you're listening to this, but it is June. It's the beginning of June as I record this for us in the Northern Hemisphere. We're coming to the end of spring in a couple of weeks and into summer. We're certainly having some summer-ish weather here. Where I live in Maine in the northeast of the United States, it tends to be weather's a really weird thing. We have an expression, I realize other people say the same thing. If you don't like the weather, wait a minute. It changes. Some people have related our temperatures to the lottery numbers where they go up and down all the time. So we'll have a day of 90 degrees Fahrenheit and then another day of 40 degrees Fahrenheit the next day, and it'll go back and forth quite a lot until it sort of stabilizes a little bit when summer hits. And even then, it's a little bit crazy. We sometimes get snow into May. It's a little rare, but it has happened. But I love it. I love weather. I love to observe weather. And, I always talk about the day here. I feel like it's something, I hope it feels like a connection. It feels like you can understand a little bit what my environment's like when I'm talking to you. It's a little bit overcast today, which I am, I'm totally cool with. Obviously, I like all kinds of weather. Sunny days do make me happy, but so do rainstorms. Anyway, today we're going to talk about ego and what is ego and different ideas about ego, and do you have a big ego, a little ego, all of these things. It's an important and popular topic. And at least, in English and in the United States, that word is used very loosely, right? So there is the Freudian definition of ego. There's the Jungian definition of ego. People have spiritual ideas of what ego is. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what ego is. Is ego bad? Is it something that you need to get rid of? Excuse me. A little cough there. I don't edit these in general, so, sometimes I cough. and then I have a little sip of coffee, and that helps me out a little bit. So let's talk about ego, and we're going to get into identity and spiritual identity and sort of ideal identity, that sort of thing. I'm going to talk a lot about all of these things because I think it becomes confusing if you're a spiritual seeker. It can become super confusing, and you sort of wonder, what the heck are these people talking about? And I've heard the word ego. I've heard people say the ego is the devil, and you've got to get rid of it. You've got to get rid of your ego and all of these things. So I'm going to give you my definition of ego, and it may or definitely may not correspond with how other people define ego, and mine's probably closest to the psychoanalyst Jung. Ego is simply your sense of identity, the sense of who you are, your sense of I, most of the time, as a separate being in the world. Okay, so when I say I went to the store, my concept of who that I is my ego, right? It's my self-concept is another sort of idea there that fits. And so it is, again, how I operate in the world as an individual. Where this becomes sticky from a spiritual perspective is that there's a number of places, and I'm going to talk about them, but where it becomes the stickiest from the spiritual perspective is the over-identification with the ego. And that simply means that this is, my idea of I'm a body and a mind, and I'm moving through the world as a separate being, and that's all there is, separates me from identifying as part of the whole, identifying as part of divinity, as part of the entire universe, as interconnected to everything. And that's where trouble kind of starts to creep in from a spiritual perspective, right? When we have, when we don't think we are connected to everything, we become less ethical, for example, right? We don't treat people and beings in the planet that we live on very well because we feel like we are separate from that. We feel like we're not affected by how we treat others. And this is where karma comes in, right? This is when, as the effects we create in the universe are the effects we are creating for ourselves, because we are part and parcel and not separate from everything. But we have an ego. We come into the world sort of undifferentiated, right? As babies, everything is sort of an extension of us. And then we learn, the ego is primarily learned. Our self-concept, our idea of ourself is learned over time. We learn we have a name, and we identify with that name. When somebody says our name, we pay attention. We learn the adults bring us food and change us and do all of these things as a baby. So they seem separate from us, even though they're perhaps responding to us crying or whatever. And so the idea of separation happens fairly early on in human development. I can't give you the exact range, but it's early when we're first born. And then we grow up and we add to our self-concept. Things happen to us. We think of ourselves that make us think of ourselves in certain ways. We also have this ideal self-concept, and this is something I'm doing some work around right now, some exploratory work around right now in meditation and in doing shamanic journeying, is that we all, if I were to ask you to describe yourself and and how it relates to your values, right? I have this ideal self where I say, I'm a good person. I'm an honest person. I am, a good father. I'm a good this. I'm a good that. And so, we have this version of ourselves and our self-concept that is that has to do with our values and our ideals. And sometimes we don't always live up to those, right? Sometimes I am not 100% honest. To be 100% honest with you, I am not always 100% honest. And that is something, in general, I do not tell lies or mislead people or steal things or do any of that. But, if I'm at somebody's house and they serve me some food and I don't think it's the greatest thing I've ever eaten, and they, ask me how it is, I'm going to say, wow, this is great. This is great. You've done a good job here. I'm not going to hurt their feelings. Right. And that's a choice, and it's part of my value system. Do I value honoring their feelings more than, telling a white lie now and then? And some people would not. Some people would say, no, I'm sorry, I don't like this. And, feelings would get hurt. And that is a value choice. So these ideals that we have tie into our values. And how do I feel about myself when I don't necessarily live up to my values? Like one of my ideals is that I think I'm a good parent, right? I have a great relationship with my daughters, and I like to think I'm a good parent. Anybody who's listening to this as a parent knows that sometimes you fail. Sometimes you make a choice and it turns out to be the wrong one. And parenting is hard. Making choices. Some people just sort of give up and have set these like strict rules for no reason, and don't put a lot of thought into it. I put a significant amount of thought into parenting, and I have a great relationship with my daughters, and sometimes that means I make choices that I'm not happy about afterwards. And how does that affect me when I don't live up to my ideals? Right? Does that affect my self-esteem? This is another component of ego, is how highly I regard myself, or how highly you regard yourself. And ultimately, when I'm speaking of I'm talking about ego here. So we know, and I've talked about this in earlier podcasts about divinity and all of these things, that inside each of us, at the core of each of us, we have a mind, and we have a body, and we have a soul, and we have a spirit, and we have, an astral body, and an etheric body, and a mental body, and all of these different systems and levels and, types of spiritual reality and consciousness, all of these things. And underneath all of it is this spark of pure divinity, this spark of the creator of the universe, whether you want to call that God or the universe or what have you. And that spark is the piece that is the same as everything. Everything you see is made out of the same stuff from a spiritual perspective. And even material reality, it's all made out of the same stuff. There's different flavors of it. There's different frequencies of it. But the substance of material reality, when you get down to it, it's all energy and information. So we are at our core this divinity, and we are divinity expressing itself as an individual. And people have been trying to make sense of that forever. Like, why is that? Why, like, if I'm a divine being at my core, if I am the universe, essentially, if I'm a part of that, why even have an ego? Why even differentiate into this human form for this incarnation? And lots of people have answered that question. I'll give you a take or two on that, and I'm going to be 100% honest with you. Who knows, right? Who really knows? It just is. And, I know part of being human is wanting to understand everything and wanting to understand why, the answer to why. And sometimes it's really hard to parse out. And this one is in particular very hard to parse out. So one story is that the formless creator of the universe just decided is being playful, right? Is creating this whole universe to sort of experience play. And that might sound weird if you've been through tragedy and trauma, as we all have. Well, this doesn't feel very playful, but you have to think of things on a universal scale or a multiversal scale, right? There's more than one universe. Probably infinite universes, for all I know. So that's one idea, that this universal consciousness had the idea that it wanted to play. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know about ascribing human activities to universal consciousness. One of the characteristics of human beings is that we tend to anthropomorphize everything, meaning we turn everything, we look at everything through the lens of being human, right? When we think about aliens, and this may sound like a tangent, but it's probably good in the realm of discussing ego, right? We talk about aliens from outer space or wherever they happen to be from. Could be in other dimensions or what have you. Let's say they exist. I've never met one, but let's say that that aliens exist. Well, our scientists and all these people are like, some of them are like, well, if aliens exist, we shouldn't contact them because they could just wipe us out, or come and take all our resources and all this stuff. And they put a very human slant on things, right? They look at us as if they look at aliens as if they are us looking at other creatures that we've maybe wiped off the planet or that sort of thing. And you have to think, if there are advanced alien civilizations that grew up outside of the grew up with completely different biology than us, and came up without the same social structures as us, we have no idea how or what they think or what their motivations might be. We just don't. And look, we can't, I think trying to understand what they might be like by using human beings as an example is, completely wrong. Whatever they're like, it's not going to be like us, and it's going to be quote unquote alien, so alien that we may have a difficult time understanding it because it'll be so outside of our experience that we can't necessarily put ourselves in their shoes. If they wear shoes, who knows? Maybe they don't wear shoes. And so I do find it really interesting that there's a lot of UFO disclosure coming out from the government right now. a lot of video footage from military planes and showing stuff right now. It makes me feel like they're on the verge of releasing some information that they've had for a long time. Who knows? I find it interesting that this stuff is starting to get leaked out, and people are like, yeah, it's funny because for so long there was a thought that, when aliens, when the government reveals they're aliens, people are going to freak out about it. People are going to panic. It's going to lead to people questioning their belief systems and all this and that. And the truth is, it's barely made news. Like, it's not that these are necessarily aliens, but they're the government leaking all kinds of UFO footage. It's just funny, like, that people are like, yeah, all right, we're cool. This is all right. We're not going to, we're not even going to pay attention. We got other things going on. The pandemic's going on. The political situation around the world is chaotic as always, that sort of thing. So the other sticky part about ego is that when we over-identify with it, again, we're saying this is all, ego is all I am. My sense of self as being separate is all I am. We tend to act in ways that aren't necessarily ethical because we do not care for other beings as we care for ourselves. We tend to become self-centered, right? We pollute, we are cruel to other people, we may use harsh words. And I just think of the I think of the Buddhist, what do you call it? Is it the Eightfold Path? I may be speaking incorrectly. You'll have to pardon me if I do, but the Eightfold, the 8 rules of Buddhist, that Buddha spoke about, which are, things like right speech, right? Well, why does that matter? Why does it matter if I speak in what is the right, and what is right speech? But in general, I can hurt people with my words. And if I do that, I am seeing them as separate from myself, right? So this is all about busting through this illusion that I am not connected, that I am not a part of other people, that we're not connected to the whole together in the same way, and that we don't have the same, sort of the oversoul, the Brahman in Sanskrit, right? That we're all swimming in the same water. And to use a crude metaphor, it's like I'm peeing in the pool and I'm expecting it only to affect you. We're all in the same pool, right? And so when I mess up the environment, or I use cruel words to somebody, or I hurt somebody, or I'm cruel to animals, or all of these things, I'm in the same pool. These, I am a part of all of those. And so that reality, that sort of weakening of that ego wall tends to make us act in ethical ways, right? What the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, is, and if you come from a Christian background, that comes from Christianity, but the Buddha spoke the same, almost identical words to that 500 years earlier. And there is spiritual wisdom there. It's not just an ethical guideline. There's spiritual wisdom, because when you understand that you are one with everything and everyone, treating others badly means you're treating yourself badly. But the stronger you identify with your ego, the less you care about others. So an extreme example of that is sort of the narcissistic sociopath. And you can, just look at very recent politics to see that sort of thing, right? The narcissistic sociopath cares about no one but themselves, and they have an overinflated sense of themselves. At least in the United States, we use the expression, he's got a big ego, right? He's got a big ego. I don't know how you measure ego, but what we mean is this person has an inflated sense of themselves, right? Sometimes that is used to put down somebody who has a significant amount of self-confidence. And there's nothing wrong with genuine self-confidence, right? So that's the other side of identifying with the divinity, is that there is a certain sense of self-confidence that comes from that. When I know that I'm connected to the entire universe, when I know that I have a divine self, and that I am divinity expressing itself through this human form, through my emotions, my mind, and my body, when I know that there is a certain sense of confidence, but it's not the kind of confidence that brags. It's not hubris. It is not the kind of confidence that seeks out more confidence in the form of material things or accolades or praise. That's fake confidence. Real confidence is real confidence manifests itself as becoming less attached and less averse, right? Less attached to things, right? I don't care about things anymore, and less averse. I'm not pushing away things that I don't desire. So attachments are that I'm clinging to the things that I desire, and aversions are I'm pushing away the things that I don't desire. So spiritual self-confidence happens when I identify less and less with my ego self. It doesn't mean the ego self goes away. It just means I don't think that's all I am. And so attachments and aversions start to dissipate. And again, this is spoken about by Buddha, and it's spoken about in certainly other forms of spirituality. Sometimes it's really hidden in there. Sometimes you have to dig for that, in other spiritual teachings, because there's cultural background to the teachings. There's stuff going on there, and people have to be taught in certain ways. I'm hoping that I'm speaking very plainly about this stuff, because for me to grasp this stuff, I've got to define it for myself in the simplest of terms, and I try to do that for this podcast especially. Right? If you're a regular listener, one of the things I do is, if I throw a term out there like ego, is I will always sort of define it so that you understand what I mean when I'm saying stuff. Not that I'm trying to define, be the source of truth of, this is what this word means, just so that I have to put these terms in a simple form so that we understand each other. So when I talk about ego and you're hearing me talk about it, that you know what I mean when I talk about it. So there's not, I'm hopefully not creating more confusion. That's just my goal, is to speak very clearly. So I tend to take these things and put them into simpler terms so that I can understand them. I'm not, I study lots of things, but I wouldn't consider myself a religious scholar per se. But I certainly look at lots of other forms of spirituality. I don't read Sanskrit. I don't read Pali. I don't read Latin, even though I took 4 years of Latin in high school. I don't remember much of it. I hate to say that, but that's true. And so, I'm often relying on translations of stuff and lots of different sources and analyses by people smarter than I am. And when I do that, and then I try to take things and break them down into my own terms. And, this is a thing that I think most people would benefit from, right? When you're reading scripture, or you're reading, and that may be sacrilegious for me to suggest that, excuse me, that you break things down into terms that you can understand. I don't know. Hopefully not. And I don't really, I'm not trying to change anybody's belief system or religion or anything like that. That's not the goal here. My own viewpoints are my own viewpoints. My opinions are my opinions. And you may certainly disagree about my definitions of things, and I'm okay with that. Because again, that's hopefully it's part of me loosening the grip that ego has on me and identifying less and less with that sense of self. So the way that ego can come through is we see that in these ideological wars, right? The religious wars, people fighting it out. I mean, that's going on in the world right now. People fighting over religious differences, which, ultimately, when we see conflict like Israel and Palestine that's going on right now, it's about all kinds of things. It's about land and water rights and history and the ability for people to self-govern and all of these things. Underneath it all, there, of course, in that part of the world, there's a religious component to the warfare, right? There is this sense of, I deserve this because I am, from the people that God has denoted this land belongs to. There is that justification happen on both sides of that conflict. I am right because I am the chosen one. We are the chosen people. God himself said this piece of land belongs to me. And I'm not going to speak about the truth or falsehood of that, but there is, to me, there is less God in that conflict than ego. Right? There is, when ego acts up, it is very defensive. There's this strong identification of, and there's this othering that happens. Those people over there are others. Okay, they don't believe the same things I do. So they are others. And therefore inferior, right? So it happens for a lot of people, and this is, I see this little drama playing out everywhere, right? So we see this with racism, with nationalism, with all kinds of bigotry, all kinds of hatred stems out of this othering. And what's going on there frequently is that people have, so we have our individual identity, and then we frequently tie that to a group identity, right? So in order to have some self-esteem, I'm going to relegate some of my identity. So I'm a citizen of the United States. We call ourselves Americans, even though I know there are other Americas, right? There's North America, South America, Central America. In the United States, we refer to ourselves as Americans, which is it's self-separating, saying that, other people from other countries are not Americans, but, we don't have, I know in other languages it exists to say, these are United Statesers, essentially, but we don't have that phrase. And so, people strongly identify with that, and people want to say whatever country they're from is number one. America is number one, or wherever you're from is number one. We're the best at something. We take pride in who we are, and, that sort of thing. A lot of religious, spiritual writings about the dangers of pride. Right. And again, pride isn't necessarily like, hey, I'm proud of my kids. They did a great job in school this year. It's not necessarily what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, again, building up this ego, building up this esteem from I'm associated with this country, and so people from other countries are inferior to me, or other countries are inferior to me. What a load. I hate to tell you, it's a load of crap, and I don't care where you're from, or what your religion is, or what your ethnicity is, or whatever. It's all crap. All of it. It is all just more and more separation, and the more you tie your sense of self-worth to some group identity, whether that be religious or ethnic or, national, or you tie your identity to a sports team. Look at these, all over the world, there are riots after sports games, whether your team wins or loses. People are, burning cars in the street and rioting. What's that all about? Well, what that's about is people have given up their self-esteem, and this is pride. This is the danger of pride, right? Pride in where it doesn't belong, especially in some sort of group identity, some sort of nationalistic or ethnic or sexual identity, right? We have to show dominance in a violent way. Well, that's a perversion of the divine masculine, right? It's this violent impulse. I'm going to have power over somebody else. And that is a major cause of the ills in the world. A major cause. Right? Ethnic cleansing. Genocide. Pretty much the same thing. Riots over sports games. The violence we saw in the Capitol in the United States earlier in the year, where people people identified with a single politician, again, giving up their individuality to act as part of a mob, right? So they have ego, but part of that ego is over-identified with a group enough to do things they probably normally wouldn't do. When you look at some of them, we look at some of the people who are arrested for the violence in the Capitol of the United States. they're like, oh, I don't, that person's, a local business owner and has never been violent, never been arrested in their lives. And some of them were definitely rabble rousers who have, belonged to violent extremist groups. And those people, I believe, were manipulating the mob, and so were the politicians who were spurring them on. Because a mob are people who have, in an unhealthy way, given up a lot of their individual identity and just sort of going along for the ride. And mobs are capable of almost anything, any level of violence. Mobs are really dangerous in that way. They have an ego of their own, so to speak. And a lot of people who've been arrested for that violence are like, I don't know, I just got caught up. Right, that's what happens. That's what happens when you don't, you have this ego, but a big portion of it is identified with, in a wrong way, with a mob or a group or, a nationality or an ethnicity. When it's over-identified with ethnicity, you get hate groups. When it's over-identified with, sports teams, we get riots after sports events. Happens all over the world. It's crazy to me. So what then is healthy is, this sense of, okay, I have this understanding, I have an ego. I have this sense of self as a separate thing. But again, it's like I have a body, but I am not the body. I have a mind, but I am not the mind. I have an ego, but I am not the ego. I am ultimately this divine spark that is part of everything. And everything that I do affects me because I am interconnected, right? I'm peeing in the pool. And if I assume that only other people are affected by me peeing in the pool, that's a pretty wrong assumption. So the goal then is, or not the goal, but one of the ways through this, one of the ways of spiritual development is to start to disidentify with that which you are not. Right? I am not the ego. I have the ego. This is not to say that you delude yourself into pretending that you do not have an ego. That is a different thing. I have an ego. If I did not, I would not be able to speak to you from a sense of who I am as an individual. I just don't think that my ego is underneath it all who I am. I think it's a thing that I have, right? And the universe has many, many egos. Billions, maybe trillions, who knows, of egos. And they're all, through it all, they're all interconnected. It's sort of like a really good metaphor, I hope it's a good metaphor to communicate this, is that if you look at mushrooms growing in the forest, right, you see these mushrooms popping up from the soil. And they look like individual mushrooms. But underneath the soil is this huge network of mycelium, right? And the mushrooms that are popping up, let's say 100 mushrooms pop up in a spot in the forest floor, right? And they all look like individual beings. And they could be regarded as such. And if, say they're edible and you pick each one, then they're individualized mushrooms. But when they're growing, underneath all of that is one network of mycelium. If you don't know what mycelium is, it's like the equivalent of roots for mushrooms, like the roots of trees grow everywhere. But when mushrooms grow, the most of what you see above ground is not the majority of what a mushroom is. Mushrooms are a fungus, and they grow on substrate, which could be all kinds of things. But some grow in soil and have these huge. There are the largest living being on Earth that we know of is a patch of mycelium that's miles wide, right? So there's one living being that's miles and miles wide. And so this is a little bit what ego is like, right? So the oversoul, the Brahman, as you were, maybe we think of that as the mycelium. So it's everything there is and everything interconnected, and that's underneath everything. And then we pop up, our little ego pops up, our body pops into existence. And we appear as individual mushrooms, but underneath it all, we're all interconnected. Everything we do ripples out like dropping a stone in a pond. That ripples go everywhere. So I started this by talking about why I like to do these in the mornings and why I'm a morning person, is that I don't experience a lot of the ripples of the people who are around me, and because they're asleep. They're primarily asleep not everybody, but more people are. So even on an energetic level, the thoughts we put out into the world, the words we put out into the world, affect everything around us, and that includes us, right? We often don't include ourselves in things like when we do exercises on compassion. When we give love to others, we don't always give love to ourselves. Seems kind of weird, but frequently when I see clients, either from doing a shamanic healing session with somebody or coaching or mentoring, people frequently have these horrible inner dialogues, and we say things to ourselves that we would not accept from a stranger or someone we loved speaking to us, and things that we would never say to someone that we loved, right? So that's really negative. That's, negative self-talk is about negative self-esteem. Underneath it all, that real level of, and some people overcompensate for that stuff, right? Some people overcompensate for negative self-esteem by, buying flashy clothes or a flashy car, or, they give this outward appearance of being more than they are, or they brag a lot or what have you. Underneath that is a real sense of I'm broken, I'm unworthy, which is sad to me, because the ultimate truth is, again, we're that mycelium under the mushrooms. We're the mushrooms popping up, but underneath it all, we are the universe. Underneath it all, we are everything there is. We're no less a part of the universe than anybody or anything else. We're no less a part of the universe than the sun. Right? So, with that, I'm going to wrap up. I hope that you enjoy this. I hope that you'll subscribe in using whatever podcasting listening channel you use, whether that's Spotify or iTunes or something else. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope you'll visit my website. I hope you'll interact. Send me messages if there are topics you're interested in or guests you'd like me to talk to. Because I do this for you, and I love that I have listeners all over the world, and it helps give me that greater sense of connection, right? That sense of connection to everything there is and to the whole universe. With that, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I will talk to you real soon.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.